Welcome back, Red Eyes members. We are talking with Andy Thomas about we're talking about the climate of fear, the era of turmoil, and the energy of hope, and the election of Barack Obama, among many other things. We've been talking about crop circles too, of course. But in this segment here, I'd like to begin to talk a little bit more about, I guess, the demand for control that seems to be coming as well in regards to how the fear agenda is being played out, and also this idea of depopulation. I'm just reminded of this article that even Wired magazine just the other day published about the Georgia Guidestones, that openly, in one sense, depending on how you interpret that, of course, talks about keeping the population low in that regard. So again, the information is coming out more and more in the mainstream all the time, and I'm just amazed how blatant and how open this and the magazine, as it were portrayed, was very much in a questioning manner. Of course, they questioned who built these monuments, who dedicated them, who paid for them, and so forth. But again, it means that things are coming out, as it were. And Andy, I'd like to ask you a little bit about this idea about depopulation and what you think the main reasons for that are. Some people are into this idea that the elite will want to have get the control back, if you will, of the planet. They want to have just a few people around and if you will, enjoy the benefits of this, well, parasitical planet that it actually really is, you know. But what's your take on it? Why do you think that this is an agenda at this particular time?
Well, I think this is where you come to the point where you have to try, if possible, to sort of put yourself into the minds of those who might be fomenting these agendas. Because obviously the standard view of the powers that are out there is that they're evil and what they're trying to do is get rid of us all and do horrible things to us. Now, maybe that's true, but of course they may not see it through those eyes. Now, it may well be that those people who are seemingly pulling the strings from behind the scenes honestly believe that they are doing it for the best of reasons. Now, this may not actually concur with what we want. Nonetheless, I think we have to consider that they may have a belief that justifies anything they do. Now, that doesn't make it right, clearly, but I think it helps us to understand if we try to see it through that sort of viewpoint. So, in other words, I'm not sure that those creating these agendas of control and of possible depopulation would be doing it just to be evil. One presumes they might do it because they honestly thought that it was the best thing for the world, or they just think that it would be better if it was a world for them and nobody else. But nonetheless, this is where you have to consider that they must surely believe that the ends justify the means, and therefore, when you see it through that viewpoint, it's not so impossible that, for instance, they might have sacrificed nearly 3,000 people to create 9/11. Because this is one of the objections you often hear to conspiracy theory, which is that, well, who would dare do such a thing to their own people? Who would possibly do that? But you have to look a little bit wider, because if you believe that you're working for a more ultimate good, and there is evidence that some of, whether you want to call them the elite or the Illuminati or whatever you want to call them, whoever these people are pulling the strings, there does seem to be a strong theme of occult belief running through it. And I think that their convictions that what they're doing is right would be very solid. So therefore, if they thought a world without 3/4 of the current population was a good thing for the planet, they would presumably just carry on. And this is where it becomes difficult, because then you're dealing with people that you can't appeal to their better nature. And so therefore, all you can try to do is try to just expose the fact that this kind of program may be going on and try to counterbalance it. And obviously, the more awareness there is that these things might be happening, the less likely it is that they can succeed. And I mean, I think this is a case in point with the weapons of mass destruction issue. Now, when it became clear that that had been pretty much created to create the mandate to go into Iraq, I think people actually were much more cynical. Now, if they wanted to create another similar war, whether they wanted to go into Iran or these days likely Pakistan or wherever, nonetheless, it's going to be much, much harder for the powers that be to do that because so many people are now more aware.
Yeah.
And they are looking at what's going on. And I think the weapons of mass destruction debacle did open a lot of eyes to that. So, you know, I am willing to believe that if people had not protested to the degree that they did about the Iraq war, had people not done that, we probably would have been bombing Iran, 2 years ago. Some people say, well, the Iraq war demonstrations for peace didn't work, because they did carry on. But I would argue that you have to look more long-term than that. And what it told the powers that be was that there are millions of people that do care. I mean, in London alone, and lots of other cities too, but London alone had its biggest ever demonstration against the Iraq war. Now, somebody sitting there is going to have to realize sooner or later, okay, maybe we can't just do anything we want too quickly. And therefore, it stays their hand. And so therefore, with all of this stuff that we're talking about, we have to just make them aware that we are aware. And the more people that see what's going on, and again, 9/11 is a great case in point here, the huge rise of doubt in the official story does tell them that they can't just get away with anything. And I think up to now they have believed possibly that they can. And we're saying they, without truly knowing who they are. There are some researchers that do believe that we can point the finger and name names, and some I'm sure are true. Some of it we must, of course, also remember is still speculation, and there's a lot of work to be done to reveal exactly what and who it is we're talking about. So we can only guess to a degree here. But to go back to the subject of depopulation, I mean, again, we need to be slightly careful because a few years ago there was, for instance, a lecture given by Dr. Eric Pianka of the Texas Academy for Sciences, in which it was reported that he had actually advocated exterminating most of the human population. Now, that very quickly went round the conspiracy world as a fact that he had said that. If you actually look at a statement that Dr. Pianka then put out later, that's not quite what he said. What he said was he thought that sooner or later we would be wiped out, not that we should be, although he did still support the view the world would be better with less people. Nonetheless, he was not, in fact, a sort of Machiavellian evil figure saying that we should all die. So I think, again, what this speaks of more is a sign of how deeply we mistrust authority, the fact that we are willing to believe that somebody out there wants to wipe us all out. So I think the conspiracy world also needs to look at its own beliefs and look at its own psychology behind these beliefs. And be very careful that it doesn't project outwards a world that is perhaps too dark. And I do think we always need to strike the balance here. Be prepared for certain things being true, but not to make the absolute assumption that they're true. But either way, always just trying to create debates that are very open so that, therefore, it makes it less likely that we can be hoodwinked or in any way abused, because the more people that are aware of what's going on, the less likely that that can happen.
Exactly. A very, very good point. Many people, they want to have a clear enemy in that sense. Many people want to have it simple, a face that represents that evil that we actually do see in the world in that sense. And again, you mentioned the they. Do you think that we're talking about a small, very, very highly organized group here, or a large group, or just a kind of a philosophical ideology, if you will, that actually just connects many of these people who are working towards the New World Order agenda, for instance? Do you have any ideas or theories about this?
Well, you see, I think this is one of the interesting aspects, is that when you boil it down, we don't know for sure who exactly we are dealing with, beyond a few obvious faces. Now, I mean, There was a book which came out a year or so back, I believe by Mark Rothko. I have to check that. But and it was basically about the 6,000 people that run the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a conspiracy book. It was a mainstream book just looking at the people who had the most influence in the world. But what was interesting was now that book received a lot of coverage in the press, happy mainstream coverage, and yet a lot of the names mentioned in that book are a lot of the very same names that conspiracy theorists point their fingers at as being the people who were trying to create this control agenda. So I think probably we could certainly identify a lot of the key names. And, of course, we have these unelected sort of quangos, which have very high-level meetings, you know, the obvious ones like the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Tavistock Institute, you know, etc.
Yes.
When you look at the people who now fairly openly attend these meetings, I think we can pretty much have an idea of who it is that is pulling the strings. Now, whether they are the same people that seem to also have these very shadowy occult beliefs that some of the secret societies that seem to bind some of these people together seem to hold, now obviously that then gets more into the realm of speculation. But, of course, we also have things like the Bohemian Grove pageant, the cremation of care ceremony, which is carried out every year. And, I mean, this is another interesting thing, is that obviously a lot of influential leaders and politicians and industrialists or whatever, you know, each year are gathering in these woods in California and attending these strange rituals. Now, again, you have to say, is this evidence that they are absolute sort of occultists, or is it just a silly little pageant that they think is more important than it really is? I don't know. But what I think is important is that it's something that is not spoken about overtly. And because of that, of course, it just invites further speculation. It invites the conspiracy world to want to know what is going on. So I think they should be more open about what the intentions behind the Bohemian Grove rituals are if they don't want people to suspect them of being evil murderers. And I think this is the problem, because they are not open about what goes on in places like that. You are inevitably inviting the conspiracy world to therefore fill the vacuum with its own ideas, which to some degrees, of course, it has to do. But knowing the true motivation of these people, obviously it can only be guesswork to a degree. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, as long as what we put out there when we're speculating is definitely pronounced to be speculation. And I think one of the things that can put people off, people trying to reveal these hidden agendas, is that some of the views you hear are very extreme. They're very dogmatic. They will hear, you know, no opposition. And that doesn't help, because what I tend to find is that people who are on the fringes of interest in the kind of conspiracy stuff, they're very easily put off when they hear somebody ranting and raving about the Illuminati, you know, sacrificing children to stone owls and all of that. I think you have to be careful that it's presented in such a way that you maintain a balance and say, well, we don't really know what's going on here, but there are certain key pieces of evidence that you can look at. And that's where I think events like 9/11 are very important, because there are real-world facts and figures that absolutely reveal that the truth has not been told about that. But then again, that's all you can say. You can say, okay, what they said happened here clearly didn't. The physics of the falls of the towers are clearly in question, and you list the reasons why. I think we need to be very careful we don't hit people over the head too quickly with conclusions as to who, what, where did do it, unless we have that absolute evidence. What we need to create at the moment is a world that gets people questioning.
Yes.
And just asking themselves the question, hang on a minute, why does the news want me to believe this today? And then a lot of it will fall into place. I do truly believe that. But all the time we are trying to hit people with our own dogma as to what we think is going on. It actually creates a situation where people are repelled away, which is a shame, because I definitely think there are areas that do need looking at under the microscope by as many people as possible. But extremism does put people off, and I think we need to be very careful with how we present these discussions to, shall we say, you know, the outer world.
Well, it's a good point, and also at the same time, I also feel that it's important